Supposed to have something working on my fucking screen.
Hey, and we are live.
Oh, there's no countdown. Where's Fred?
No, that's a fantastic way to start. Let's see. Yeah, I should probably share my screen here. Welcome to Kubefirst Live. This is going to be the most exciting Kubefirst Live probably in our history. Our buddy Fred, who clearly keeps us more organized than we were giving him credit for, is out sick today. So Jared and I are trying our very best Kubefirst Live MC impression. And it's going with, I'd say, questionable results so far. What would you say, Jared?
That feels about right.
Feels about
Halfway
right.
between good and bad.
Right. So, everybody, I would like to, I guess I'll introduce myself first. I'm John Dietz. I'm one of the co-founders of the Kubefirst project. Obviously, our buddy Fred could not be with us here today, but still here in spirit, I'm absolutely certain. And
sorry, real quick, John, your slides aren't up if you were hoping that they were.
Oh, thank you. I will bring that up right now. Where's Fred? Just kidding. How do we look now?
There's Fred. That looks great. I was missing Fred. That's how I knew it was.
That's fantastic. So, Jared, would you like to introduce yourself? I'm real glad to have you today. This one, we are trying to do a live stream by the skin of our teeth. We've had a whole bunch of code go into the main branch at the last second, and we'll see how it goes. But my buddy Jared here, as always, is there to pull us out of any jams that we run into. Jared, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Jared, the other co-founder of Kubefirst, and that's my intro today. Been just so happy to be here, and I'm just excited to talk about virtual clusters.
There's no way we're frazzled. So let's go ahead and get into the topic of the day. This one's going to be a fun one for us. We're here to talk about vCluster, who's brought. Let's see. It was Loft SH. Is the company that built vCluster. We didn't know about vCluster until relatively recently. A member of our community, was it Cameron? Or yeah.
I think Hugo may have
Hugo P.
been working with vCluster.
So we had a couple members of our community come in. They were messing around with this vCluster technology, trying to find a way to leverage vCluster on the Kubefirst platform because of what seems to be this really neat opportunity to leverage vCluster for really all kinds of different purposes. Most obvious is ephemeral Kubernetes environments. We have this internally at Kubefirst. We kind of have our own platform engineering operations. We have our own platform team. We're constantly iterating on the platform, building the platform, testing the platform. We have all kinds of different variations of the platform. We have AWS, GCP, Civo, Vultr, DigitalOcean. We have GitHub flavors and GitLab flavors. We have, variations with where we use the cloud's native DNS. We have variations where we use Cloudflare as the DNS layer. And being able to use vCluster as a mechanism for these ephemeral environments for testing purposes as a platform engineer is selfishly what has me really excited about vCluster technology. But Jared did a little bit of a spike on how the technology works. Jared, do you want to just kind of give us a brief explanation of like when you install vCluster, like what happens?
I'll do my best, and apologies for the dog. That's going to be happening again here in a second, I think. But vCluster. So essentially, they have a nice CLI tool that you can download, and then you can run vCluster create command. And basically what that does is creates a Kubernetes cluster that runs in a namespace, but acts as its own Kubernetes cluster. So after playing around with it a little bit, we had a live stream a couple weeks ago where we were talking about Crossplane and Terraform and Atlantis. And we were showing kind of workload clusters and how we practice our iterations of these clusters that we have to create so that we can do application delivery to different environments. And through that process, we have to create a lot of new Kubernetes clusters. So when vCluster, after using vCluster, I kind of saw the light on how to do that in a way where when we're doing these cluster operations, we can now create workload clusters in these virtual clusters instead of having to provision new infrastructure, which helps our iterations and times on and resource savings, all kinds of other things to create these new full-blown environments for what we consider full-blown with, applications running, ingresses, certificates, all the stuff that we need to deliver applications on the platform.
So vCluster is basically like a cluster, an isolated Kubernetes cluster, but that lives inside your existing cluster, right? How does that manifest as like what is it? Is it a pod? Is it a namespace? Like what? How does it break down?
Yeah, it's some pods. There's a few deployments in a stateful set that mock all the resources, I guess, that you would get in a normal Kubernetes cluster, but then are isolated to a namespace.
That's really neat. So what kind of permissions do you need in order to be able to create a V cluster? Like, do you have to necessarily be like a cluster admin? Can like a typical Kubernetes user install V cluster? I think I might have read a rumor that basically if you can create a deployment, you can create a V cluster in your namespace.
I didn't pick up on that detail, and I didn't look too far. I didn't have time to get into that. So you clearly know more than I do about this. No,
yeah,
never.
I did read in their README that basically if you can, if you're in a namespace and you have access to create a deployment, that's literally the only permission that you need in order to create a full-blown Kubernetes cluster. And
that's pretty cool.
It's really super sweet. And, obviously with our Kubefirst platform being a GitOps driven ecosystem where we can bind GitOps, instant GitOps platforms to your Kubernetes cluster through an Argo CD registry point, it just opens this really neat opportunity for us to be able to provision ephemeral clusters. They don't have to be ephemeral, but you provision a V cluster. And then you can have all of your platform tools on that V cluster. And there's so many different valuable exercises that you can conduct in that type of an environment where you have that GitOps foundation, you have that HashiCorp Vault foundation, you have your infrastructure as code automated, Crossplane and blah, blah, blah. And I got thinking about the different use cases for vCluster last night. Obviously as platform engineers, we kind of look at it as the problem that it solves as a platform engineer, just needing to always have, these Kubernetes clusters that are able to test your provisioning operations, able to test your GitOps unfurling when you're bootstrapping those clusters, being able to test different variations of your platform. We have all these different variations ourselves. But there's probably a whole bunch more different use cases,
I'm sure there's a ton of them. Real quick, do you want to throw my terminal up? Because you were asking me questions I can't answer super well, but we could do some exploring together while we're here.
Let's do.
It's that font. I keep going bigger, and it doesn't look like it's getting any bigger. Is that readable?
If you could give me one more +1, it would be great. Yeah, that's fantastic.
That's good. That's just the longest thing. All right. This cluster that we're looking at here, actually, I'm going to pull this up really quick. So in our default management cluster that we get at the end of a Kubefirst installation, we have some extra stuff that's going to be upcoming in our cluster management piece. But this is an implementation that we're showing today. We have this new registry of apps where we have clusters. This registry developed blue is actually a virtual cluster that we've created within our management Kubernetes cluster that we deliver as the platform. So if we take a look here, this was already created before getting here. These are all the tools that we bootstrap it with. So it's going to have your external DNS, external secrets, a few other things in there. But just to go look at that in the management Kubernetes cluster. So Develop Blue is the namespace that was created. And then these are all of the pods that are running in that single namespace. And then you can see that everything that was installed to that cluster through that Argo CD bootstrapping runs as additional pods in this namespace. So from a management point of view, if I do git deploy real quick, we can see that these are the, and I should probably do git stateful sets real quick. So these are the primary components, I would say, that are running in this cloud Kubernetes cluster in a namespace to give you that same virtual Kubernetes experience.
That's really,
so I don't know if it did that help with what you were asking me previously? I said there's some deployments and there's a stateful set, and I can't really answer.
So like when I see Develop Blue API, that's literally a cluster named Develop Blue, and that's the Kubernetes API server for that instance of vCluster, right?
Yeah, and then so if we want to actually get into that cluster context, so the interact with the virtual cluster instead of the management Kubernetes cluster that we're currently looking at. Now, when I look in here and do kgit pods, I have nothing in the default namespace, which is different than what we had before. But now we can see that I have this new kube context. The previous namespace up above here has in the management cluster, you can kind of denote here which one I'm currently looking at. The Cloudflare multi-cluster 3 is the management cluster we're running today. And then Develop Blue is going to be any of the virtual cluster stuff that we're currently looking at. So that's the management context and how it looks with all of the resources inclusive of what's been bootstrapped into that cluster. And then the connecting to the virtual cluster view of what resources we've installed in there.
That's so freaking cool. So
yeah, it's an endless world of possibilities what we can do with this.
And if you think about it, like this vCluster technology is built upon K3s as the Kubernetes distribution, nice, lightweight, simple Kubernetes distro. And it's running inside of our management cluster. This particular management cluster is running in the Civo cloud. The Civo cloud runs their Kubernetes also on K3s. So if you really stop and think about it, Civo has their Kubernetes cloud, right? And we ask of Civo, hey, we would like a management cluster, please. They give us a cluster that's brand new to us and looks mint condition, but it's actually living in their infrastructure. Then in that internal to that management cluster that we provision in their cloud, we're able to create our own virtual clusters there within. And you can probably imagine that Inception can continue.
Yeah.
It's really
we haven't gone deeper, so I don't know what's possible from here. I don't think we have time to go deeper. I think this was the right amount of exploration to get it working on the platform.
Right. So one thing that I want to call out, when we're looking at Jared's terminal here, and we see a workload cluster that has been provisioned on vCluster, and he does like a kget pods across all namespaces. The reason that cert manager is in there, an external DNS, an external secrets operator, an Ingress Nginx, and reloader, and all that stuff, that's in there because of our workload template registry in GitOps, and we're able to bind these vClusters directly to our GitOps templates, and that's how all of these applications through our app of apps pattern and Argo CD unfurl and get delivered to a vCluster ecosystem. And that's just our opinion at Kubefirst. Like, we want our ephemeral vCluster environments to come with all of the default platform tools that you would always want on all of your workload clusters. But that's not a requirement of vCluster, obviously. Like, when you install a brand new mint condition vCluster without any GitOps, without any of Kubefirst shenanigans being applied to the vCluster, you basically get a like when you do kget ns, it's just going to be like your kube system and the default namespace. It's going to have like no pods running in it that aren't part of the Kubernetes system. And so all these extra pieces that we're adding on just sort of through our workload cluster work that we're preparing to be releasing. I got thinking about some of the use cases for vCluster though, and it's like, think about a hackathon. You know, you've got your infrastructure that you got at your company. I imagine you have like some type of management or centralized or hub cluster. You probably have a security cluster. You have a dev stage prod cluster or a pre-prod prod cluster. And like, it's the third Tuesday of the month or whatever your story is, and it's hackathon day, and everyone's all excited, and they have all these great ideas about all the things that they want to try out and all these tools that they want to explore. And like a lot of times people will be tempted to use infrastructure that already exists for stories like that. But with vCluster, you can still use that same infrastructure. You don't have to provision a whole new Kubernetes cluster with all of the overhead of delivering that to a cloud and getting ingress set up and domains and blah, blah, blah. You can just like add a vCluster to your DevOps cluster and have a brand new mint condition space that's destroyable by just deleting the namespace that you installed it to, which is just like ridiculous. There's probably stories with like ETL workloads, right? Like if you're doing data warehousing operations where like you have to span out a whole bunch of ETL workloads, maybe there's a sensitivity about it where you want to have different isolations across the ETL jobs. Really, anytime that multi-tenancy comes into play, like imagine somebody that had an application, they wanted to be able to deliver it, and they wanted to be able to have every single one of their clients have their own Kubernetes cluster. That would be cost prohibitive to do so. You've got to have your master control plane. You've got to have all this stuff. You have to have load balancers for each one of your clusters and blah, blah, blah. But like with vCluster, there's a new neat trick where you can establish that isolation that you want and just put whatever applications you need in the namespace in the vCluster instance, and you're guaranteed that you won't be able to escape that context, that isolation. So like it doesn't have to necessarily be for downstream clients. It could be because you're an ops team and you have different development teams that are all sharing Kubernetes pre-production cluster. And maybe the two teams differ on what version of a particular cluster-wide resource should be installed in that cluster. That's a big problem if you don't have a trick like this up your sleeve of being able to establish a new layer of isolation for those cluster-wide resources. And now you can just have a vCluster and whatever's in there can be as cluster-wide as you need it to be because you're isolated at that Kubernetes cluster layer, which is super cool. I lost your microphone from the dog, but I'm sure you were just agreeing with the astute observations of vCluster spaces.
I absolutely was. Yeah, sorry about that. The dog's been a little barky.
No, it's all good, man. It's all good. So I don't know. Let me check my list of talking points that I wanted to make sure to cover. Usually Fred's so good about doing this naturally, and I'm just not as good as Fred is. But
we all can't be as good as Fred.
I know. It's a tough world. Yeah, I think I covered most of the heavy hitting talking points. I would love it. I don't know. So let me set the table here and just describe to any of our viewers that both Jared and I don't have any idea if this demo is going to go well or not. We're both secretly expecting that we might run into a hitch or two just because we had some late breaking additions to what it was that we were trying to show. So this is going to be a good old fashioned honest live stream where we might break stuff, we might have to fix stuff. But Jared, if we could, I would love to just kind of take a look at our GitOps implementation that implements vCluster and maybe just kind of explore vCluster a little bit. Particularly like from a kubectl connection standpoint, like you're not connecting to, if you install a vCluster into your management cluster, you don't talk to that vCluster through your kubectl connection to your management cluster. You talk to it just through a new kubectl connection. Isn't that right?
Yeah, at least that's how I've been doing it. If there's anybody listening who has a lot more experience than about a week with vCluster, I'd love to hear what you're doing with it and how you're operating. But give me just 1 second. I think I might have Metaphor running, and I just want to check in on it. Ugh. We'll see if this does the trick. If it starts to unfurl, we're on to the next piece. But you said something about going through and creating a new vCluster, or do you want to talk about the connect? They have a really nice CLI command for vCluster connect, and then you feed it your cluster name, and then it takes care of that connection for you. And if you don't have the kube config, then they can set up a port forward to your our management cluster in this scenario, where that would allow you access from your local host through a port forward to that management cluster is how I understand it. So
right on. Yeah, I mean, if we can, I would love to see a new cluster provision. I don't know if we're in a good enough state on
only one way to find out.
Well, let's find out.
Yeah.
Let's do.
I guess this is a sneak peek, if you will, of our new cluster management UI that's up and coming. We have a little bit more work to do, and we're focusing on getting it out hopefully in about 3 weeks. I'd say 3-4 weeks feels about right. Yeah. So we have this nice little pane here. It's going to drop open for a new cluster. I'm going to call this one develop green. Almost green. We're going to be provisioning in Sivo's London 1 region. And this instance size is actually not a real input field for this vCluster. That would actually be for if we were using a cloud instance of a cluster, which we would just select this other button here. I'm going to hit create. So aside from, we've got the new cluster here. Let's close this up. This is going to be provisioning. And the quickest way to see what's happening, or if we're underway here, is we have this new commit in our GitOps repository now. It's given the repo enough information to describe how to provision one of these new virtual clusters. So if I go over to Argo CD and I look at our registry, you can see that within the management cluster, as I mentioned a little bit ago, we have this new clusters app of app, and that immediately woke up and was like, hey, I've got a new cluster that I need to create within myself here. And this was develop blue, so that was a bad click. So let's check on develop green. Develop green is gonna hopefully load here in a second. Argo CD needs a little more resources. It's been a little slow today, but it's been very busy. And as soon as it loads, hopefully, we're gonna see that new bootstrapped environment being created. Well, I guess technically it's gonna create that virtual cluster first, then bootstrap that environment and get all that set up. So
right on.
Do like a 4 Mississippi on Argo CD. Bear with us.
I believe in you, Argo CD.
I know, and I want to hit refresh, but I know it'll just make it worse. So I just have to fight it. Keep my hands off the keyboard for a second.
Patience has never been your strong suit. I believe in you, though.
Doesn't mean I can't open another tab and look at something else, right? All right, see, it popped up as soon as I left. So we have a few things happening. We're terraforming these. I'm sorry, we're not terraforming. We're GitOpsing these initial V clusters. We do run a little bit of Terraform against these clusters after they're provisioned. That's going to give it all the data that it needs to be considered good enough for Kubefirst to be able to do all the stuff that it does within that new workload. It's going to take probably 4 minutes or so to completely come up and be bootstrapped, hydrated with all the Let's Encrypt issuers and all that kind of stuff. But it's kind of a slow, boring process. Infrastructure provisioning today, right? I'm complaining about 4 minutes. Imagine if this was an EKS cluster.
I know.
I could be sitting on Papa Bezos' dime, just watching my node group create. Meanwhile, I'm getting a whole cluster.
Right. And that's another thing, the cost savings that you get from implementing vCluster clusters when it's appropriate for your story. Obviously, sometimes a virtual cluster may not be the right architectural pattern for you, but when it does fit the bill, having a V cluster in your pre-existing Kubernetes cluster means you're not paying for a new control plane. You're not paying. I guess you're leveraging the load balancer from the management cluster. Is that correct, Jared? Or does it get its own load balancer? Do you know?
I believe it's using its own, but we should take a look here in a second.
Right on.
I think it's using the management. Well, it is using. I'm definitely connecting to the virtual clusters over the management's Ingress.
Yeah.
So
right on
that.
And just to kind of give some color to what we're looking at here, Jared's got some provisioning operations happening with this new V cluster that's coming up. V cluster itself takes just a couple minutes for the K3S cluster to establish. And then we lay all of our platform tools on top of that V cluster. So, we start out like we always do with the trifecta. We have Ingress Nginx, Insert Manager, and external DNS. Then we get into cert issuers, and we establish connectivity between our external secrets operator and the management cluster's vault. So you don't have to have a whole new vault for your new V cluster. You can bind that external secrets operator back to your main management cluster's HashiCorp vault instance. From let's see what else is in there. I guess you have Ingress Nginx reloader we have in there so that you can restart pods if you have a secret that needs applications to reload or anything like that. And then by default, it's just those platform tools. And then you can use this cluster for whatever you want to use this cluster for. Architecturally, what we do, what we're going to be doing once we have this release out the door, is that same GitOps repository that we give you to host that controls all of the automation for your management ecosystem. That same GitOps repository is just going to have a second cluster available in it with its configurations. And these clusters that we create and the configurations of the clusters that we create are all being derived from a GitOps template or a GitOps folder that's called templates in our new GitOps structure. Jared, if whenever it's conducive to your flow, if we could show a little bit about that new GitOps directory structure and sort of how you have the new V cluster bound, I think that would be probably helpful.
Sure. So, sorry, I know you want to see V cluster, but which part are you trying to demonstrate? Do you want to see how it's registered in the management cluster?
Exactly.
Do you want to show the resources? Okay. So, and sorry, last question is show the resources for the V cluster instead of like infrastructure?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so if you look at our develop blue, or actually let's look at green since we just created that one, right? And they're all the same. But so we have this vCluster application kind, and basically we installed our Helm chart. We make the we tell the vCluster what the endpoint is that we're going to be using, and we configure it with an Ingress. We give it 4 replicas, and that's the whole song and dance. So we additionally have a little job that waits for all the deployments and the stateful sets and stuff to be ready. But that's kind of the long and short of what I can show for.
It's pretty straightforward. Yeah. And then I guess when we bootstrap that cluster to get all those different applications like Cert Manager and Ingress Nginx and whatever into that new V cluster, that's just like a registry of Argo CD to a directory, the same way our management cluster is, right?
Yeah, all that stuff unfurls itself through sync waves that are automated. So we currently run the, I don't remember what they call the technical term for it. You will, because Argo CD, when you have a hub and spoke, what do they call that model? There's a specific term that everybody was gathering around.
You're not talking application sets. You're talking.
No, it's all right. Anyways, we have one single Argo CD in this instance. We're not installing an Argo CD to this new cluster that we provisioned. So that management cluster is Argo CD. We create a new cluster secret reference. We make sure that the Argo CD instance in management can connect to that in-cluster virtual cluster, and then it bootstraps all the apps the same old way that it does in the management cluster. It's just some more GitOps in a different place. It's a new registry to go to a new spot. All of our resources, I guess, if you wanted to visualize that just a little bit, would be on one of these application kinds. We have all of our destinations as the namespace develop green, which is, or I'm sorry, the name develop green, which is going to be the develop green cluster connection here, where Argo CD sends all the stuff.
Gotcha. So the way Kubefirst is implementing vClusters, we have a management cluster. The management cluster has its own Argo CD, has its own HashiCorp vault. Internal to that management cluster, we're hosting a vCluster, and then we're wiring up the vCluster to take advantage of the management cluster's Argo CD, take advantage of the management cluster's vault for secrets management. It borrows the ingress from the upstream via some cool mirroring techniques that they have. And that's it. You just have a full-blown cluster in K3S internal to your original cluster that barely even knows that it's there. It's pretty freaking cool.
Yeah, it's almost rude. Like it's almost too easy to have clusters these days.
I know. It's really neat.
Somebody slow down with all the clusters. So
we're just kidding, Loft. Keep up the good work. It's incredible.
Yeah. Touche.
So, what's going on here? This is something in a error state.
Yeah, this is Metaphor. I have one more.
You're trying to get the Metaphor application running in it.
Yeah, it will be after this. I think that's 3 bugs is usually pretty standard to get it working, and that was 3. So. Oh, come on! All right, maybe there won't be a show today for Metaphor, but
all right, we'll skip
soon. We'll be sure that Metaphor works when we release it. How about that? Is that a fair trade?
That sounds like a fair contract. It really does. That's what happens when you live stream off the main branch.
It's fun. It's more fun that way. Live on the edge. Come on, little buddy.
I know you want Metaphor. Oh, look at you. Yeah. Look at you. That's really neat. So
invalid image name. Oh, that's a bad copy pasta. But my GitHub org is incorrect. But all right, I'll keep tinkering. If you have more to talk about, I'll take 40 seconds. And
yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Otherwise, our audience is probably bored by now.
No, yeah, I'm just about ready to wrap it up. I am kind of curious to see if Metaphor is going to show. And I guess to kill some airtime for a quick second, I'll remind everybody, all of our viewers at least, that we are going to be in London next week, which is a new one for both Jared and I. We're going to Civo Navigate. Civo Cloud is having a conference, the Navigate conference. It's their second conference, first one in Europe, I believe. That's got to be true. Their first one ever was in Tampa. And we're going to be giving a couple talks there. One of the talks that we're going to be giving is going to be on GitOps orchestration patterns when you're farming platforms, when you're farming cloud native platforms. There's all these chicken and egg scenarios that are tough to shake out. Scenarios like you want your Git repositories to be managed by your IAC, but your IAC needs that Git repository to exist to be able to run it. Or you need a secret for your application, but you don't have your secrets manager yet. And then after you have your secrets manager, you want that secret to be managed by your secrets manager. All those different types of chicken and eggs. We're going to talk through all those different scenarios. And then we have another talk that we're going to be giving about bridging the gap between infrastructure as code and GitOps. GitOps is obviously super exciting to us. We think that it is the way to run Kubernetes infrastructure concretely. But it is sort of a little bit of a vague topic regarding these infrastructure as code technologies and which ones should you be using with GitOps and which ones, you've got these up and comers like Crossplane and Crossplane can run Terraform, and but Crossplane also has its own native IAC implementation. You have Open Control Plane has their own technique for how to do IAC. You've got OpenTF now entering the field, and there's just a lot of cloudiness between two topics that are truly almost identical. Like infrastructure as code, predicated on desired state, and it becomes actual state through APIs. GitOps is predicated on desired state, but it is driving Kubernetes CRD and application configurations instead. So a little bit different, and the gray area in between the two is a little complex and just warranted a little bit of discussion. So we're going to be giving a talk on that as well. So how's Metaphor looking, Jared? Are we doing good?
I think we're doing great.
Well, look at that little fella. We recognize Metaphor.
Yeah, it's a little bit better to see too. We'll have long term, not for our initial release. We'll have these environments where you can reference sets of applications. Metaphor will always be delivered to those environments, but Metaphor is our example application for those that aren't familiar. And now that we have this running in this Metaphor application, I guess I can drop into the blue cluster now. And if I do get pods, hopefully there's a recently new Metaphor. Yep, there we go. It's in develop blue, but there's my Metaphor pod, 82 seconds old. Now that application's running in this virtual cluster, you get to see that it's taking advantage of the Ingress. It's taking advantage of our instance of Vault that's running in that management cluster. So we're still pulling configurations out of management's single Vault. That's the source for all of our secrets and stuff. So just a nice extra demo piece, I guess, for the value that the virtual clusters can add when you have applications that can run in them as well.
Super cool. All right. So in summary, we've got this hot new technology on the planet called vCluster by Loft. Very impressive piece of technology. We think that it's going to be enormously impactful to platform engineering teams. There's all kinds of other use cases for it, less selfishly, things like being able to provide cluster layer isolation for multi-tenancy types of environments, creating ephemeral environments. If you're creating environments when feature branches are being created on your front-end apps and you want just a whole new stack to represent that, you can do that with ease now. It reduces your costs. Stories like hackathons and machine learning and ETL and blah, blah, blah. There's all kinds of really neat use cases for vCluster. We at Kubefirst are drinking the Kool-Aid. We love what vCluster is throwing down. We are going to be driving toward adoption of vCluster on our platform when we release cluster management in the coming weeks. Any final details on vCluster before we close this thing out and do our best Fred impressions?
No, I don't think so. I mean, really, would just love to hear from anyone that's watching about how you're using vCluster, if this is something that would be valuable to you, if you like the pattern, if it's something that you think your engineering teams would need or use to be able to replicate your environments. Really just always looking for that good feedback from folks about the direction that we're going and if it's helpful to you.
Right on. Well, thank you, Jared, and great job on the demo. That was I know we put a lot of weight on your shoulders with all those last minute breaking changes, but
got Metaphor running in both virtual clusters. No big deal. Everything's good to go.
Couldn't do much better. 40 minutes into a live stream and everything's well. So
yeah.
So again, the Kubefirst platform, we support a bunch of different clouds, AWS, Civo. Obviously, the demo that we did today was on the Civo cloud, and we plan to release cluster management to the Civo cloud first before it's introduced to the rest of the clouds. We're excited about our upcoming talks at Civo Navigate. If anybody viewing is in the London area, we'll be in London all next week. And we do have a little bit of extra time, so reach out. We would love to get up with you and have a coffee, have a drink, whatever. Yeah, we support also
I hear there's a lot of pubs in London.
I heard a rumor about that too. We'll have to find out what's going on in England together, buddy. Let's see. We got a K3D local environment, so this portable platform that you're able to plug into each one of these different clouds. You're also able to plug it into your local host, which is, again, just another one of these really impactful platform engineering techniques that brings the cloud to your local host. You double that up with vCluster and you got some real powerhouse machinery on your laptop. We support Vultr, GCP, DigitalOcean, GitHub, GitLab, and we, with a single button click or a single command if you're a terminal person, excuse me, are going to deliver you automated infrastructure as code, Kubernetes clusters, now Kubernetes clusters that can have Kubernetes clusters inside them, which is crazy. We have let's see, a cross-plane implementation is coming to Kubefirst in this cluster management release as well. So you'll now be able to natively be able to implement cross-plane on your platform. HashiCorp Vault for secrets management, automated Terraform with Atlantis, GitOps style IAC with Crossplane. We have Ingress Nginx and Cert Manager, automated DNS, and you name it, like everything that you need to run your enterprise. Boop, you just hit a button and you get an entire enterprise organization, and you can have now Kubernetes clusters inside of Kubernetes clusters because it's 2023 and whatever you used to know doesn't matter. With all that said, Jared, I think this is it time to close this out? I think it is.
I think so.
Let's do it. Let's do our very best Fred impression. Fred, I'm so sad he's not here. This is my favorite part of the show, and he delivers so well. He does these dad jokes that are sort of technology oriented, and they're just the worst. And Jared and I dug real deep and found a good one today. So, Fred, this one's for you, baby. So, Jared, tell me, why did the PowerPoint presentation cross the road?
You're gonna have to give it to me.
To get to the other slide.
Yeah. There it is.
But Ching, yeah, I'm sure there's a button for that I don't know where it is. So in any event, everybody.
Yeah, the sound effects were the missing component of this live stream. That's for sure.
Absolutely. I'll have to figure out where those are one of these days. So everybody, it's been great. Jared, thank you so much for hopping on and muscling through the vCluster implementation. I think it went off without a hitch somehow. And
some way.
we're getting more and more stable with it by the minute, literally. So by the time this thing hits the door and is out in production, we do think that you're going to have just a really top-notch experience with vCluster and virtual clusters on the Kubefirst platform. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we will see you guys in London. So have a great day, everybody.
See you, everyone.